just pick out a couple of threads that haven't already been touched on, because it's been a very rich diet, and I doubt there are too many in this room that seriously contest or challenge anything that's been said. From a world vision point of view, Martin's presentation really highlights why we and most other humanitarian aid organisations are so involved in this discussion. No longer is it the face of the polar bear, as important as that is, and the loss of so many species. It's the human face that is being impacted in the poorest, least developed countries. And it comes, as Martin said, in the form of malaria, of diarrhoea, in the highlands of New Guinea, where it was always too cool for malaria because there were no mosquitoes. We've now got mosquitoes. Harare, Nairobi, built above the mosquito line now with mosquitoes and malaria. Malaria, the biggest killer of kids in Africa. It comes in the form of natural disasters. In 2006, there were 250 natural disasters in our region. Speaking of the region of the neighbours north of Australia. When World Vision was founded in 1950, there were 50 natural disasters in our region. We have seen a 40% shift in spend from development programs, trying to move people to sustainable development, to humanitarian and relief programs, just trying to keep people alive. This is changing the face of everything we do. For most of us, this is difficult because we have deep misgivings that this could really be as bad as what we heard this afternoon. And I share that. I know psychologically, I don't want to believe it. I want to say there must be a U-Butte solution, and humans have always been able to find a quick, shortcut solution that's usually painless. This deep-seated misgiving is making it very difficult to get traction and action. Why do we have these misgivings? There's religious explanations, there's psychological explanations. Freud in Civilization and its Discontents. Sigmund Freud wrote, humans are simultaneously attracted to thanatos, death, and to eros, life. And maybe that psychological explanation that says we simply won't believe this, even though we have a strong suspicion this is a death wish, is a lure that's attracting us. It's very difficult even in religious communities. In religious communities, the high priests who are telling us this is true are the scientists. And as we know, there has been a long history of maybe suspicion, lack of ease with science. And whilst most of us are going, scientists aren't lobbyists, they're not secularists, they're not out there just trying to sell us an agenda, they're telling us the facts. There is still a dis-ease about trusting the science. The religious view that this Parliament represents is actually only one religious view. We need to be honest about that. The religious view this Parliament represents is the view that creation care, that ecosystems are sacred, a profoundly important contribution. However, there is no doubt that in this country, where an opposition leader has lost his position because he took climate change seriously, where he has been replaced by a climate change skeptic who only a month ago said climate change is crap. Excuse the French, Australian politicians speak bluntly. We now see many religious Christian organisations, particularly in the bush, preferring that view, that the scientists are deceiving us, that skeptics really are the ones who are facing up to the big lie, that this is happening, that we have to have a serious carbon tax. In so many religious communities, That view, though we might prefer religious communities to say what's fundamentally different about us is we don't have a materialist view, we have a spiritual dimension, are in fact lining up on the other side. Sometimes it's escape theology that says God's in control, so if this is happening, then God must intend it, and we who are faithful will escape. We'll be just raptured out, taken out. It's all different forms of theology, but the religious view that maybe the Parliament of Religion represents is seriously contested. And we have to become ambassadors and persuaders and spokespeople again. The extraordinary challenge we have got at Copenhagen is that essentially the whole world has to agree on everything. If Copenhagen fails, and I desperately hope it doesn't, it will be a massive crisis for the UN. The Bali Roadmap, as you've heard, said by Copenhagen, we will have a legally binding treaty. There's not a speaker, a delegate, a negotiator at Copenhagen of the 198 nations represented who doesn't make magnificent speeches. Speeches about this is the most morally and economically significant challenge for the future. But then, like a giant poker game, countries keep their cards close to their chest, unwilling to lay it down, in the case that they might be able to win by another country making deeper cuts and going first and protecting their political and electoral chances from having to announce a carbon tax, a cost to having to cut greenhouse gases. Essentially, that's what's happened in Australia. In this nation, which of all developed nations is already the most impacted by climate change, will be the most impacted by climate change, we have now got targets that aren't very ambitious, with no mechanism to achieve those targets. The throwing out of the opposition leader that happened this week and replacing him with a climate skeptic means that an emissions trading scheme went down. We have no way of actually getting to those targets. That's how disastrous this week has been on this issue politically here. When our own scientists and the IPCC tell us, you are the nation most impacted. The seminal report in this nation, the Garneau report, said by 2050, the Murray-Darling Basin, which is 80% of our bread basket, will have lost, that Murray-Darling Basin will have lost 50% of its productivity. These are horrific scenarios for this nation, and look at the politics and ask, where were religious communities in this debate? How did this happen? Of course, being an international challenge, it means we have to find an international paradigm. Not based on 3-year or 4-year electoral cycles with scare campaigns about what a new tax, a carbon tax, will do. We actually have to find a way of saying it is a global village. We are profoundly interdependent. Some people get sick in Mexico. We close schools here in Australia because of swine flu. Some banks with what I thought were funny names in America get into trouble. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And banks all around the world are impacted. What we know in this global village is that if we continue losing the forests in Indonesia and Brazil and Congo and elsewhere, we in every nation are impacted. We have to have a global ethic, a new international paradigm, and this is proving incredibly difficult. Well, let me finish by saying that Copenhagen represents an extraordinary challenge for faith communities to step up, to galvanise, to name this as the challenge. To say from our faith dimension, hasn't that profligate use of water and energy brought us such wonderful happiness in life? A materialistic worldview where we have been manufacturing lethal greenhouse gases that is causing us to suffocate has not has not, according to a spiritual worldview, been a solid ground to base what is a good life, a valued life, a virtuous life on. That is our message. That message needs to see us galvanised, because this is indeed the great moral, economic and spiritual challenge of our times. Thank you.